Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second meeting. Thankfully, we got to meet again after ASB renewed our club. And so this meeting is going to be about brain structures. So what is the brain? The brain is one of our most essential and complex organs. It's composed of billions of nerves that provide us with multiple senses. We're going to watch this overview video really quick.
The brain is...
I'm sorry, can you guys hear? Can you guys hear? Is the audio shared with you all?
Yeah, we can hear the audio, but it's a little soft.
I think if you turn your if we all turn our cameras off, it makes like.
Or you could do the optimize video or sound for video thing when you're doing the share screen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's also like a share computer sound thing.
Yeah, if you just share screen again, it's in the bottom right corner of the window that pops up. Bottom left, sorry. Bottom left corner.
Oh, share computer sound right here.
Yes.
Oops. Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
It's the command center for the entire body. It makes us who we are. It receives information from our senses and controls our thoughts and movement. To better explore this incredibly complex organ, scientists have divided it into parts and regions. The largest part is the cerebrum, which is divided into two sides called hemispheres, just like the Earth. The outer layer is known as the cortex, which is Latin for bark. Like a tree's bark, the surface is only 1/8 inch thick, but it also contains millions of cells with fibers that send messages to other brain areas. More than 2/3 of the surface of the cortex hides in hundreds of little folds that make the wiggly visible lines on the brain. Animals that are less intelligent have a smoother brain surface. The cortex is divided into 4 regions. The frontal lobe is for personality and emotions, higher thinking skills like problem solving and controlling movement. It continues to develop until you're in your mid-20s. The temporal lobe helps process your hearing and other senses, and helps with language and reading. The parietal lobe is involved with your senses, attention, and language. The occipital lobe helps your eyes see, including recognition of shapes and colors. The thalamus in the center of the brain relays sensory and motor information to the cortex and helps with consciousness, sleep, and alertness. 12 pairs of cranial nerves carry information from your senses to and from the brain and body. Lower in the brain, we find the cerebellum, which plays a key role in motor control, coordination, and spatial navigation, so we can find our way out of a maze, for example. Underneath is the brainstem, which connects the brain to the spinal cord, a nerve pathway that runs all the way down your back, sending and receiving information from your senses. The brainstem includes the pons, which helps control our breathing, and the medulla oblongata, which regulates our heart and other body reflexes like vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. The limbic system, a region under the cortex, processes our emotions and drives. It contains the brain's reward circuit, which releases the chemical dopamine, making us feel pleasure. The anticipation of pleasure motivates us to repeat important human behaviors like eating, having fun with friends, or falling in love. But it also encourages us to repeat risky behaviors like taking drugs. Drugs signal the brain to release unusually strong amounts of dopamine. This flood of dopamine causes the high that drug users seek and makes it difficult to enjoy more normal, simple pleasures. Repeated activation of this reward pathway can lead to addiction. The limbic system includes the amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus in the temporal lobe, which is like a memory indexer that sends memories to certain parts of the brain for storage and retrieves them when you need them. The brain controls many actions through rapid nerve impulses, but there are some body functions that the brain modulates over many hours or days by secreting hormones via special glands like the hypothalamus, which wakes you up in the morning and gets the adrenaline flowing, like during a test or athletic event. The pituitary gland, often called the master gland, which helps control growth, body temperature, pregnancy, and childbirth. And the tiny pineal gland, which helps to control sleep and circadian rhythms. These are just a few of the parts and functions of the beautiful, amazing, and complex human brain.
Okay, there we go. All right. Next slide. So our brain can be divided into the left and right hemispheres. Usually you hear that the left side is associated with more like the logical side of the brain. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, while the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Both are connected by the corpus callosum, and sometimes this is just like a fun fact, but sometimes the corpus callosum, like very rarely, needs to be cut to prevent seizures in people, because the corpus callosum does spread the seizure signals across both parts of the brain. So in rare cases, the corpus callosum needs to be cut to prevent these seizures. In the left side of the brain, Broca and Wernicke's area is responsible for speech. And in general, the left side of the brain is associated with analytic thought, reasoning, math, and science. And the right side of the brain is associated with creative thinking, imagination, intuition, and a lot more.
So here are a couple of images of the brain. As shown, the brain is divided into different parts, all with different functions. Firstly, the frontal lobe, shown in red, deals with the motor control, which influences controlled movement, reflexes, concentration, planning, and problem solving, speech, and smell. Next, in yellow, we have the parietal lobe, which controls touch, pressure, taste, and the ability to understand where you are in space. At the back of the brain in pale yellow, we have the occipital lobe, which controls our vision and sight. The cerebellum controls our coordination, and the temporal lobe controls our hearing and facial recognition. If you look closely, there are shaded areas in the parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. These areas control our language and reading capabilities. This is a brief overview of the functions and structures of the complex inner workings of our brain. Next slide. Here is a more in-depth look at the different lobes of the brain, starting with the parietal lobe. It is located in the upper back portion of the brain and is responsible for our touch, taste, and overall temperature. If this area is damaged through a concussion or other form of trauma to this area, these senses won't function properly. Next, the occipital lobe, which is located near the back of the brain, is responsible for processing visual information. This helps us make sense of the visual information we are receiving from our eyes. It also helps us understand things like distance, depth perception, and color determination. The frontal lobe, which is located near the front of the brain, is responsible for our cognitive thinking, which is how we learn, receive information, and control our judgment. It's one of the reasons teens overall make pretty dumb decisions. It is not fully developed until we are well into our 20s or around 25. Lastly, the temporal lobe, which is located right above the brainstem near the middle of the brain, controls our emotions, language, and some aspects of eyesight. Many people have a dominant left side since they are right-handed. Remember that the left side controls the right side of the brain and vice versa. It can also help us understand and remember things we verbally hear. Next slide.
Okay, the cerebellum, which can also be called the little brain, is located in the back of the brain and is connected to the brainstem. This part of the brain is responsible for coordinating voluntary movements or movements that we control. For example, talking and raising your hand are two movements that we control. Oh, sorry, did I skip on the slides?
Oh, it's okay. Keep talking.
Yeah, just keep
Okay,
going.
sorry. For example, talking and raising your hand are two examples of voluntary movements. Additionally, it's also responsible for motor skills, including balance, coordination, and posture. If there was any damage to this part of the brain, there would be an inability to judge distance and know when to stop, and difficulty doing quick movements. Those are some of the functions of the cerebellum, but here's a little bit about the shape of the cerebellum. It is made up of two hemispheres, and they are connected in the middle by something called the vermis. And lastly, even though this part of the brain is only responsible for about 10% of our brain's volume, it contains 50% of our total brain's neurons. And neurons function to send information using electrical impulses and chemical signals. So this means that the cerebellum is sending out 50% of the brain's information. You can go back to the other one, probably will make more sense.
Here is another depiction of the lobes of the brain. We have already discussed that some aspects of the frontal lobe, but one thing to think about is how the development of this lack of development of this part of the brain impacts us. Since, again, this part of the brain isn't fully developed until age 25. Additionally, we discussed the parietal lobe, the occipital and temporal lobes. However, we haven't really talked about the motor and sensory cortex. The cortex is a piece of nervous system tissue on the outermost part of the brain. The motor cortex controls movement, and the sensory cortex controls our sensations as shown. They are located in between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe.
Okay, now onto the brainstem. So there's three parts of the brainstem that we're going to focus on. First is the midbrain, and it's located below the cerebral cortex, but is above both the pons and the medial oblongata. It contains the brain and the spinal. It connects the brain and the spinal cord together. And the midbrain is composed of two parts itself. The two parts are the tectum and the tegmentum, and the midbrain functions and motor functions, especially with the movement of our eyes and processing of sound and noise. Second, the pons, which is in the middle, above the medial oblongata, is a bridge between the parts of the nervous system, and it contains many important nerves, which allow our eyes to move and controls feeling in our face. Next is the medial oblongata, which is located below the pons and is the lower half of the brain stem. It regulates the basic functions of the autonomic system, which includes reflexes such as coughing, sneezing, respiratory, and much more, and it plays a role in transmitting signals between the spinal cord and parts of the brain. If this brain was injured in any way, they could be partial paralysis of the opposite side of the body. So if there was injury to the right side, then there would be paralysis to the left side and vice versa. Okay, next. Okay, now we're going to talk about the cerebrum, and it's made of two components. First is the amygdala, which is a collection of nuclei that is found deep in the temporal lobe near the hippocampus. It's part of the limbic system, which is an area of the brain that's responsible for emotions and memory, and is thought to have control of emotion and behavior, especially with fear and our responses to fear stimuli. But it isn't only responsible for fear. It's also been proved to form positive memories. Next, the hippocampus, which is also located in the temporal lobe and also part of the limbic system. It's responsible for forming new memories and additionally controls our learning and additionally memories as well.
So the brain has gray matter and white matter. Usually we find the gray matter in the brain on the outside, on the cortex of the brain, and we find the white matter on the inside of the brain. Uh, the gray matter are the bodies of the neurons, while the white matter contains the axons of the neurons. So the axons are what the electrical signal actually passes down when we're sending electrical signals throughout the brain. In the spinal cord, it's actually different though. Instead of the gray matter being on the outside, we have the gray matter on the inside and the white matter would be on the outside. The reason white matter is white is because of the myelinated axons, as we will see in the next slide. So this is the classic neuron right here. Basically what we have is we have the myelin sheaths, as said before, that insulate the axon of neuron to send a faster signal. So you can see these myelin sheaths right here. And then in the middle, you can see the axon, which these little gaps in between are called the nodes of Ranvier. And basically what these myelin sheaths do is it allows the electrical signal to travel faster around through the axon. So it jumps from each node rather than simply just traveling straight along the axon, which would take a longer amount of time. The dendrites of the body over here near the nucleus receive neurotransmitters from other neurons. And as a result, when they receive those neurotransmitters, it causes them to send the electrical signal through the axon all the way to the axon terminal where they release neurotransmitters of their own. And the process continues over and over again within your brain. The electrical signal can only travel one way, so only from the dendrites to the axon terminal. And yeah, as said before, the myelin sheaths make up white matter. So how neuron function works, I said before, is sending electrical signals, but if you've taken AP Bio or if you're taking AP Bio right now, you might have heard of action potentials. And so action potentials are when you sort of have like salts coming in and out the cells, and when you have different concentration gradients of sodium and potassium, it causes electrical signals to be passed through the axon. And so you can see that I won't go too much into detail because it's a little complicated, but basically when we have we reach a certain threshold of voltage within the cell, it automatically goes through this process right here, and it causes the electrical signal to be passed down through the whole axon after it reaches that threshold. And then drugs like methamphetamines can mimic neurotransmitters, which is why, as you can see in this PET scan over here, you sort of have the healthy control who has the red signals activeness within the brain. So methamphetamine users kind of have like overused these overuse these receptors, so they're damaged, and their brain is not as active within these areas, while a healthy person has a more active brain. And other drugs mimic this sort of effect, although they do work a little bit differently. Not all of them mimic neurotransmitters.
Now we are going to move on to talking about brain cells. There are two types that we will be focusing on: glial cells and nerve cells. Glial cells are non-neuronal cells, meaning that they do not produce electrical impulses. They work to maintain homeostasis and do this by forming myelin. This helps to protect axons and allows the signals to be sent faster and more efficiently. Nerve cells are neurons that can communicate with other neighboring neurons through electrical impulses. These can be sent to other cells throughout the brain and body. This allows your thoughts to become actions. For example, let's say I would want to move my arm. Electrical impulses are sent from my brain through my spinal cord to my arm, where it is converted to movement through the contraction of muscle cells, all in less than a second. It's very similar to how electrical current moves through a wire and allows a light bulb to be turned on when you turn the switch. The electrical current acts like the electrical impulses that are set from the brain, and the light bulb acts like the moving arm.
So we also have some important glands in the brain that secrete some important hormones. So the pituitary gland sits underneath the brain and behind the bridge of the nose. It's responsible for producing multiple hormones, like some examples are human growth hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And they regulate a lot of bodily processes, like a human growth hormone would help you grow during your teen and adolescent years. Uh, Meanwhile, the hypothalamus is an important gland because it regulates the pituitary gland and what hormones it releases. Also, it's essential to body temperature as well, maintaining that 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit that humans are supposed to regulate. And then finally, we have the pineal gland, which secretes melatonin based on circadian rhythm. So when you get tired, this gland secretes melatonin uh, to enforce that circadian rhythm. And this gland can also stimulate reproductive hormones as well. The pineal gland was actually discovered last, so the not too much is known about it, but we do know it does do these things right here. And then we also have the blood supply to the brain. So the two main arteries that provide blood to the brain are the internal carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries. Both of these arteries enter the circle of Willis, which is essentially it's sort of a circle of blood vessels so that you can keep the blood flowing to all parts of your brain. And you can kind of see it like over here. So if like one artery sort of got cut off, you could still flow blood to parts of the brain. However, if an artery was blocked, that's also known as a stroke. It causes neurons to die because they're not getting the nutrients they need, and they actually die really quickly. So that's why a stroke can be so consequential in a person's life. Actually, 700,000 people suffer from a stroke each year, actually. So that's about like 1 every 45 seconds. So it's pretty serious, and it could lead to paralysis in some parts of the body because of the death of these neurons.